Good morning. I just realized I haven't poured my coffee yet. That's kind of crazy. Okay, last video I told you about, I introduced you to the apostatepastor.com, apostatepastor.com today, and I kind of told you why. The reason I chose the title Apostate Pastor is because the word apostate just basically means someone who rejects a political or religious belief or idea, principle, and I specifically, passionately reject. I would say that the thing that I'm going to talk more about than anything, the thing that I reject the most, is I reject that the entire concept of pastoral authority that causes pastors and churches to have a select group of people that make all the decisions, and they are non-transparent, they hide, they have secrets, they do things in a manipulative and controlling way, and so that whole idea of pastoral authority is something that I passionately reject. So I'm going by the term, or going by the website, or I'm talking my personal website. It's going to be apostatepastor.com. I hope you can visit me. And the first video, after I've kind of introduced the idea of apostate pastor, the first video I wanted to make today is I want to tell you that I believe the Apostle Paul was considered an apostate, or the Apostle Paul was an apostate. And I think I'm going to go through a couple of different folks who I would say were apostates, or could have said with me, yes, there are some things that I think it's important that we renunciate, that we renounce, that we renunciate's probably not the right word. That's probably means something totally different. But anyway, there's some things that we should renounce, some things that we should passionately stand against. Acts chapter 21, Paul's been through some of his missionary journeys. I think he's probably at this point like on his this is like following his third missionary journey, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at my notes to see did I think that through. Maybe I didn't. Paul was an apostle, and Paul's coming back, and there's some coming back to Jerusalem, and there's some celebration that gets ready to happen. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. So there's some celebration, some warm reception. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. And here we are again. We're in this. We arrive at Jerusalem. Brothers and sisters, bottom of the hierarchy, receive Paul warmly. The next day, we go to see the elders in the hierarchy. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul. So Paul greeted them, told in detail what he had done, what had happened. They praise God. Then they say to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, turn away from the law, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. What shall we do? So what are we going to do, Paul? You're telling people that they don't have to do this or they don't have to do that. You're telling people that it's, what are some of those religious rules, those laws that you grew up with? I remember one for me was I grew up in a world where if you had a Bible and, here I have a Bible and I were to sit my drink on top of it, it would be the height of blasphemy. You can't do that. That's horrible. So we lived by the law. We were very careful with our Bibles, and we treated them with respect. And what else would be some examples? But anyway, so basically, the idea here is Paul's telling them, I guess it's a little different than sitting a drink on your Bible, right? Here I am talking about sitting a drink on a Bible. Paul's saying, hey, listen, you don't have to cut the tips of your penises off anymore. It's a little different level there, isn't it? But anyway, so they're saying, hey, we're hearing that you teach that circumcising your children is not a big deal and living according to our customs and following all the rules. It's not as big of a deal, and people are going to hear that, and they're zealous for the law, and they're basically going to say that you're not in the kingdom if you're not obeying the laws. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. So what we tell you? So do what we tell you. Oh, there you go. They say, hey, listen, they're certainly going to do it. So listen, we got to cover all our bases. We got to fix this. So I want you to do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who've made a law, who made a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay for their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. So if you submit to the law, Paul, and you help 4 other men submit to the law, basically, if you'll be a law keeper again, and you'll help other people be a law keeper again, basically teach a little bit of law. Don't teach all grace, teach a little bit of law. Sprinkle some law in there. So then everyone will know that there's no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. They'll make sure that that everybody knows that you're not an apostate. You're not renouncing this idea of legalism, this idea of the law. If you'll do this, make sure that no one thinks there's anything true about this, but that you yourself are living according to the law. As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. So basically these 4 things they're going to stay away from, and we're going to kind of give them less laws. We're just going to line out 4 laws for them, give them a little less, make sure that they still understand that the law is still supreme, law is still important, but they're going to have fewer laws. I mean, that this really quickly turns into a debate about whether or not you should eat meat sacrificed to idols. I mean, this law giving, I think Paul said something like, if you go back to the law, if I were to turn back to the law, I'd make the cross of Christ in vain. I would make the message of Christ in vain. I would make it meaningless. Basically, if I go back to the law, he says this in Galatians, and I'm guessing Galatians, maybe, I don't know, when was this written in comparison to this? But bottom line is, Paul here, it's obvious that there's 2 different thinkings going on, 2 different ideas going on in his mind. He's being asked to go back and submit to the law, and he knows that, submitting to the law is basically making his message, pointless. The next day, Paul took them in and purified himself along with them. Paul spent a lot of money. They said, we want you to pay for it. Remember right here? But you yourself written to them, or where was it? They have made a vow, take these men, join them, and pay their expenses. So basically they're saying, hey, we want you to not only submit to the law, but we want you to spend some money in this process. We want you to give. We want you to give legalistically. And we want you to take these. So Paul does it. He takes these men and he purified himself along with them. Then he went to the temple to give notice of the dates when the day of purification went in, and the offering would be made for each of them. He made an offering for each of them. It could have. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what was this offering, but it almost looks to me like he had to offer 3 beasts, 3 animals for each of these men. Maybe it was just 3 animals total, but could you imagine if he spent 12 head of cattle in order to keep this law? What? How insane. And so you might say, Josh, I thought you were telling us that Paul is an apostate. And here he is following the religious practices. Yeah, it's weird, because basically we have this simultaneously. We have this time when Paul is, everybody thinks he's an apostate. He's doing some things to pretend he's not an apostate when it comes to the keeping of the law, or the law of Moses. And we got this story that seems to not align. So there's a lot of questions about what is going on in this story. Is Paul just wimping out? Or is this whole story, might I say, do you know what this means? Is it bull fecal, bull crap, bullshit? Is this story just a lie? Did Luke just make this story up, trying to defend Paul's keeping of the law? Did Paul just kind of go weak? Or was Paul making a decision that he said, I'll do this for them so that they can slowly come along? Well, I think the third option is the least likely. I mean, um, or the least sensible, or the least logical, or the least, if Paul is saying to go back to the law is to ignore the cross of Christ, then that's a terrible idea for Paul to do this. If it's just a total story fabricated by Luke, well, that's possible, but that's something we have to struggle with. I mean, do we struggle with the idea that there are stories that are in the Scripture that are just totally made up stories? Well, I think that there are, but how do you deal with that? The other idea that just Paul slips, he just makes a mistake here. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking it's like a $12,000 mistake. I mean, how do you make just, oh yeah, okay, I'll bring this 12 head of cattle, or 3 or whatever. I mean, this is a massive jump. I would say, regardless of how you interpret this story, whether you think it's a lie, whether you think Paul screwed up, or whether you think Paul was wisely being all things to all people, either of the 3 ways, Paul is an apostate to the Jewish religion of law. He is an apostate to the idea that Moses' law is something we should still keep. So my argument today, my point today, regardless of how you land on this, Paul's an apostate. What did they do to apostates? Just one more word. The whole city was aroused. The people came running from all directions, seizing Paul. They dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut while they were trying to kill him. When you take a stand against, when you take a stand against crap, people don't like it. People get angry. They start throwing stones. They might try to kill you. Okay, that's my idea for the day. Paul the apostate.